Everyone hear me? Let's see. Georgette, everybody's presenting on Wednesday, May 5th.
Okay,
Cinco
I
de
just wanted to double check because I know the last week you were saying how it could possibly be Monday, but that you were shooting for Wednesday. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. As
Okay.
far as I know, it's still going to be Wednesday.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
but hopefully, I'm going to say a little prayer to the gods and hopefully Sal can make it. He's not scheduled to work on Wednesday. A little prayer to the gods. So hopefully it works out. Even if it doesn't work out, I'll still record it and he can help me evaluate because some of the things that some of the questions he knows way better than I do in terms of how to evaluate it because obviously he's in it. So I only worked in distribution, so I only worked at the end where the movie was already done. He's worked everything, so he knows how things get made early on in the process better than I do. But one thing I'm asking everybody to do, we're going to present on Wednesday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. And so just let me know when you want to present in terms of schedule, first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. Um, you're limited to 15 minutes, and we can't go longer than that because I know some of you are going to be I know some of my colleagues probably meet or force you to meet on at 1 o'clock, right? I'm assuming on Wednesdays, and you have to be there. Unlike me, who if you come, great, and if you don't, then you don't. I know some of my colleagues do take attendance. I do not. So 15 minutes, 5 groups is 75 minutes. That takes up the entire class. So it's a hard 15 minutes. So you have to finish in 15 minutes. And so hopefully you will rehearse. The unfortunate thing about having 5 presentations in 15 minutes is that we really can't give you any feedback in between the presentations, unlike my Monday class, which is a 2 hour and 45-minute class. In that class, we actually can do 15-minute presentations and 5 minutes of feedback. But since we only have 75 minutes and 5 groups, well, I mean, no feedback and just straight presentation straight through. And then Sal and I will try to figure out who's the winner at the end. Okay, so let's finish talking about tourism or travel. We're probably not going to get to the whole thing, um, but we'll probably get pretty close to the end. But anyways, so last lecture for some of you. This is your last. For some of you, last week of school, I would imagine, at least lecture school. Unless you decide to go to graduate school, then you'll have more lectures. Anyways, what is the target audience when it comes to tourism? So one of the things that you have to research or figure out is and understand. So when we talk about target audiences, again, we're not just referring to the demographics of the audience. We're also trying to figure out the psychographics of the audience. And so again, as I mentioned, if you heard the lecture from Monday, psychographics is almost as important, if not more. Well, actually, it's equally important as understanding the demographics. It's important to understand, okay, what's the age group of your target audience, but it's also very important to understand their personality. And so for example, one of the psychographics that's happening, at least within the United States, at the very least, when it comes to travel, is, well, number one, we're one of the few places in the world where Americans do not use up all their travel time. In other words, right, you're given a week of vacation or 2 weeks of vacation, depending on your employer, and we don't use it up, right? Us Americans don't use up all our time for whatever reason. Well, there's some ingrained reasons why, like culturally speaking, like the idea of work ethic and those sorts of things. But we don't use up all our vacation time, for instance. And the other thing that's happening in the United States, especially amongst you younger folks, and this again goes back to understanding the psychographics of the target audience, is the idea of short vacations. And so, meaning that what you young folks will do is you'll be very strategic in terms of like taking your vacation days. And so you're not, unlike myself when I was your age, when somebody said, okay, you have a week vacation, Puente, or Henry, or whatever, and I would say, oh, okay, cool. I would use up all my days during 1 week, and that would be it. Not you guys, not you ladies. And so the younger folks, whether it's the millennials or Gen Z or whoever, have now started, instead of taking the all continuous days, they just use their days very strategically. So, in other words, you might just take an additional day during Labor Day weekend. So instead of just having that regular 3-day weekend, you might say, oh, well, I'll take a vacation day on Tuesday. So now it's 4 days. Or I might take a vacation day on a Friday. Now it's 4 days. Or something like that. So you'll strategically plan out your vacation days according to the calendar, right? And so you'll pick days and add a day strategically throughout the calendar year. And so you have little tiny mini vacations throughout the year. And so that's very unique in the United States, which is very different than, let's say, what vacation is like in Europe, for instance, right? So at one point in time in my life, I was dating a German, and I remember she told me, "Oh, my brother's coming to visit," and here I am thinking, he's going to be here for like 2 weeks to visit us. Nope, I think he spent like, oh my God, I think 5 or 6 weeks staying with us. So unlike Americans, Germans really do use up all their vacation time, from my understanding, and so they get way more vacation time than we do. Lots of people in Europe do. So anyway, so what's the importance of research? So the importance of understanding research is understanding what your target audience, again, likes or dislikes. Again, sort of understanding not just the demographics, but understanding the psychographics of your group. And so, for instance, one thing that you may want to figure out is awareness, the level of awareness of your specific tourist attraction or your location. And so maybe one of the issues that you're having, for instance, is awareness, right? There's lots and lots of tourist attractions out there. And so people may not even be aware that you exist, number one. So what are you going to do about the lack of awareness? Knowledge, right? People may have little to no information about your location, which is a little bit tied into the idea of awareness, but knowledge, again, maybe there's a lack of marketing, a lack of word of mouth, those sorts of things when it comes to knowledge. Liking, do they like your destination? And if they do, what do they like about it? And what don't they like about your particular tourist attraction? Whatever it happens to be. And so it's a good way of figuring out, your strengths, but also figuring out, your weaknesses. You could research the preference, right? So in other words, yes, they might like your location, but maybe the numbers of your location are not going up. So for instance, you might be, let's say, Knott's Berry Farm, right? You're located in Buena Park. I mean, it's a fun amusement park. It's fine. It's cool. But I'm sure that most people living in Southern California, if they had a choice between Knott's Berry Farm and Disneyland, they would pick Disneyland. All right. And so preferences is like, okay, well, what does Disneyland have that we don't have? And so, and figure out, okay, why? And so in the case of Disneyland, of course, there's lots of reasons why people like Disneyland over Knott's Berry Farm. And conviction. And so one of the things that you could also research is trying to figure out, right, and make people believe that this is the best product for them. So how do you go about making people believe that your tourist attraction happens to be the best choice for them? Mind you, I think this is where Disney wins over Knott's. Disney does a really good job of making people believe that this is absolutely the best theme park or amusement park for them. If they have money to spend on some sort of amusement park or a theme park, Disney does a phenomenal job of making them believe that I know you have other choices in Southern California, but this is your best choice. And so I'm sure Disney did a lot of research on how to basically frame that for their target audience. Anyways, number 6, purchase. And so this is where you figure out, right, the price points for your target audience. So in other words, right, if you offered a low price, would it increase the amount of people who attended? Maybe yes, maybe no. If you offered a premium price, would people be open to that? Would people be open to the idea of a free preview or a soft opening? Yes or no? And so you figure out the price points and what's going to compel people to purchase your product. And so research can do that for you and help you figure out, you know, what's going to incentivize or compel people to buy your product. So events. So events or tourist attractions can be used to attract visitors. So for instance, there's all sorts of racial or ethnic or religious events, these cultural celebrations, right, that can attract people to certain locations. So for instance, Cinco de Mayo is coming up, right? Obviously next week. There might be some sort of Cinco de Mayo celebration somewhere around in Southern California. And this is the reason why so many Americans mistaken Cinco de Mayo as Mexican Independence Day, which is not. Just one battle in Mexico that took place against the French, where they defeated the French, but of course the French win the next day, or next couple days later the French win. And so Cinco de Mayo is just one brief victory in the battle that the Mexico had against France. And so, but again, there could be this cultural celebration, Cinco de Mayo celebration that goes on maybe in downtown LA or somewhere else, and that it might attract some visitors. Political events. So political events like political conventions, they're actually a gigantic deal. I don't know if anybody's ever been to a political convention or a political event like a convention, but it brings in thousands and thousands of people from all over the United States and all over, perhaps even the world, whether it's Democrat or Republican or whatever. They will fly in to attend these political events. There's lots of whining and dining and dancing and fun and drinking and so on and so forth. And so these are pretty cool events. If you've never been to a political convention and you get invited, don't think it's going to be boring, because it's not. It's going to be a lot of fun, actually, because these Democrat and Republican conventions can have lots of money, and they bring in lots of talented artists to perform and those sorts of things. Yes, September 16th. That is the correct day of Mexican independence. Not Cinco de Mayo. See, very good, Georgette. Arts and entertainment. So whether it's concerts or music festivals, like if you think about Stagecoach or Coachella, the arts or entertainments can bring in people and bring them to a specific location to not only go to the concert. So when people think about, um, live events, they forget about the fact that when we talk about live events, is that it also brings in a lot of tourism money because folks that live in the suburbs or from different counties come in to the city and they spend the entire day in the city, right? So, for instance, you know, when my wife wants to go, when we used to go to concerts, right, which hasn't happened in a while, but when we go to concerts, we never just go to the concert. It's usually, oh, let's go get some dinner before the concert and spend some time in the city. Although we live in Long Beach, so that's the city already. But people come in and they spend lots of time in that particular location. If you think about music festivals, it's probably a better example. Coachella or Stagecoach, people are there for several days, right? And so it brings in lots of tourism dollars to that particular county or that particular city or that particular region of the country. Um, so business conventions or trade shows are also very important when it comes to bringing in important revenue to the city. This is where your visitors and convention bureaus are very important. So the visitors and convention bureaus, essentially what they do is they try to bring in big name conventions or trade shows to come to your city. And the importance of that is that essentially you have, right, all these business travelers who come in and they spend well, not lots of days, probably like 3 to 5 days in your city, and they're usually being charged some sort of hotel or motel tax, and that motel or hotel tax goes to pay for things like um, venues and those sorts of things, helps to build infrastructure for that particular city. It's too bad that we actually end up taxing visitors who have no say in how that tax money is being used, but this is what we do. So, anyways, educational or scientific events, seminars, or academic conferences. So, for instance, as an academic, we get invited to conferences, or we submit papers to present in different locations, right? So, for instance, last year I was supposed to go to Boston to present a paper. Unfortunately, the presentation got canceled, obviously because of COVID, and so, but if that wasn't the case, then I would be flying to Boston to present. And one of the sneaky tricks that these educational conferences do to us as scholars is that they don't let you know what day you're presenting really. Well, I mean they do, but the university forces you to submit all your travel information 30 days prior, and the conferences very conveniently don't give you the information of when you're going to present until like a week before. So you have to book, right, essentially all the days to stay in Boston, as opposed to if you actually knew what day you were going to present, you can just fly in and fly out. But no, that's not what they do. They go to the conferences for 4 days or 5 days. So you got to spend all 4 or 5 days there spending money in the hotel when, you could have gone in and out in one day. But I guess that's how people make money. That's a good question. My favorite concert that I've ever attended in my life so far is Bruce Springsteen. U2 was a close second. Those are 1, 2. U2 and Bruce Springsteen. Anyways, sporting events. And so if you think about the Olympics, which are going to happen in Tokyo this year in 2021, although I've heard by all accounts that the Japanese government is not going to allow foreign tourists to come to the Olympics, which is too bad. But if we weren't having an Olympics during a COVID year or a COVID crisis, then there would be tourists from all over the world coming to go watch their favorite athletes or their country competing in the Olympics. And so you got to think about sporting events as bringing in lots of tourism dollars. So one of the great things about having the SoFi Stadium here built in Inglewood is when the Super Bowl happens here in Los Angeles. Oh my God, there's going to be all sorts of activities that go on prior to the Super Bowl. This is why they call it Super Bowl hype, but it's usually a week of events. And so tourists from, all over the country come in, perhaps the world, and just to enjoy all the events and the hype of the Super Bowl. And so there's going to be a lot of tourism dollars being generated during the Super Bowl for Southern California when Southern California does host the Super Bowl. Also, when we host the World Cup, and I think we're hosting the World Cup in 2028, we're co-hosting it with Canada and Mexico. And so when the World Cup happens in 2028, also expect us to generate tons of revenue in terms of tourism revenue. And this is the reason why, for instance, countries host World Cups is because they're hoping to generate lots of tourism dollars. Unfortunately, they have to spend too much money on their infrastructure, which means that they don't actually make any money off of the World Cup. But one of the things that the US has an advantage over other countries is that we already have a stadium infrastructure, so we don't have to spend billions of dollars building new stadiums. Our stadiums already exist, so this is why probably having a World Cup in the US is probably a good idea. So Super Bowl, we talked about that. The bowl games also, the bowl games, at least the big bowl games, happen in warm weather countries, warm weather cities for a reason. It's to bring the tourists down from cold locations to warm locations. And so again, the fact that we have the Rose Bowl every year here in Pasadena, except for this year, usually means lots of tourism dollars for Southern California. There's lots of wine festivals, wine tours, I should say wine tours, but also wine trails all over the world. Wine and food has actually become a big deal, somewhat of a big deal for people who are, let's say, foodies like myself, or people who like wine like myself. And so we're willing to travel to go to certain locations just to taste the wine. And so a location that's relatively close here to Southern California, well, to Orange County, I should say, Temecula. It's essentially trying to start up its own sort of wine trail in Temecula, or wine tours in Temecula. Also, if you think about San Ynez and San Ynez Valley, is also sort of another location that's up and coming. And last but not least, private events also bring tourists. If you think about weddings, there's weddings that happen all the time, all over the world, and people travel to these weddings. Like, for instance, I traveled to a wedding to watch my friend get married over in Australia, for instance. And so that would be an example of somebody, getting married in some faraway location, and their friends go to watch him or her get married. Yes, the traffic. So, what is the definition of a tourist attraction? Basically, what it means is are events and tourist attractions that are used to attract visitors. So again, it's usually events and or tourist attractions that are used to attract visitors. And all these examples here are examples of what I mean by a tourist attraction, right? It could be a monument or a national park. Like, for instance, do I have any pictures? This is a monument or a national park in New Zealand. And so it's sort of like Yellowstone. It has all these geysers and steam. I can't remember what they call them. But anyways, it's very similar to Yellowstone Park. If anybody's been to Yellowstone, New Zealand topography, at least in this part of the country, is very similar to Yellowstone. And they had geysers and all sorts of things. And so that would be an example of a tourist attraction. The Cotopaxi is also, this is a national park in Ecuador. And so now if you go to Ecuador and you try to go see Cotopaxi, it no longer looks like this, because when I was hiking up the mountain, it erupted 2 days later. So it's no longer, that doesn't look like this anymore. The whole top apparently blew off. I didn't see it, but I heard. So there could be art galleries or museums. If you think about the Louvre or the Smithsonian over in Washington, D.C. It could be a famous building or a stadium. For instance, if you've ever been to D.C., the Union Station in DC is considered to be a famous building. It's a famous tourist attraction in Washington. Another example is, I think this is the Burj Khalifa or something like that. And I'm sure I'm mispronouncing the name, but the Burj Khalifa, I should say. And so this is considered to be the tallest building in all of the world. It's located in, it's Dubai. It's the United Arab Emirates. And so this is a picture of Dubai, of the Burj, is it Burj Khalifa, I want to say it's called. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing the name, but that's the tallest building in the world. And so if you think about an amusement park, a theme park, if you think about an ethnic community like Olivera Street, or a famous street like Times Square, it could be leisure like, cruise ships. It could be shopping like the Dubai Mall. It could be casinos. This is also an example of a famous historical building. This is a building outside of, where did I take this picture of? Vienna. This is a picture of a palace outside of Vienna. Apparently this is where Mozart performed, and then this is where the royalty of Austria lived in this gigantic building and garden. And so again, obviously historical. What else? This is also considered historical monument. This is considered, I think, the first clock. It's located in Prague, and so you can go check out the first clock. I think it was clock. I can't remember it now anymore. But it could also be wineries or restaurants. So is anybody familiar with what is exactly the Judgment of Paris?
I heard this thing that like people in Paris like hate tourists. I don't know how true that is, but yeah, like the customer service is not like the American customer service where like the customer's always right and stuff like that, but I'm not too sure.
Um, the only issue that I had, and it's not really an issue, it's kind of expected. Us as Americans expect tourists who come to the United States to speak English. And so when I was in France, people expected you to speak French. And so, is that terrible? I don't know. I never had an issue, but yes, if you're expecting American customer service anywhere around the world, forget it. America is the one place in the world where this is what we do better than everybody else. We provide good customer service. This is what we do best. And so whether you go to New Zealand, Australia, whether you go to France, whether you go to anywhere really around the world, China, anywhere, it's American customer service is better than customer service in other countries. Well, at least based on my experience. Yes, correct, Jacob. Yes. Basically, yes. That is 100% correct. So what Jacob is saying is that for a long time, right, there was this idea that the wines in France were better than the wines anywhere else in the world. And there was a contest called the Judgment of Paris, and I think the Judgment of Paris was in 1976, I want to say. Somebody can please vet that. I'm not sure if it was 76 or not. But anyways, there was a contest like Jacob says, between wines from Napa Valley and the French wines. And it turns out that, the panel of judges or experts concluded that Napa Valley wines were better than the wines from France. And so what ends up happening because of this is people from all over the world who love wine started to flock to Napa Valley. And this is one of the reasons why, if you ever go to Napa Valley, the traffic in Napa Valley is horrible. It's because the infrastructure of Napa wasn't and still not ready for the amount of traffic that it receives from people who are traveling from all over to taste Napa Valley wines. So again, if you think about the definition of what is a tourist attraction, really it can be anything, as I mentioned before. Events or tourist attractions are used to bring in tourists, but also to add on to that, it could be something that's natural, whether that's it's beautiful, like for instance, this is the Alhambra, which is also a monument. This is in south of Spain. It could be something like this, natural beauty, right? This is the Iguazu Falls on the border of Argentina and Brazil. It could have some sort of cultural value, like Alhambra, which is right here. This is in south of Spain. Or, it could, again, leisure value or amusement value. If you think about wine tours, this is a winery outside, Mendoza. This is a winery outside of Mendoza, Argentina. So one of the things that they're trying to do in Argentina is also trying to create a sort of like a wine tour or wine trails in Argentina. They're also doing this in Australia. They're also doing this in New Zealand. They're sort of trying to copy the model of the United States and of France, and trying to bring in like foodies or people who are or into wine. They call it again enotourism, to figure out how to best promote their wineries. And so, what else was I going to say? So tourist attractions are determined sometimes by nationally trained professionals, right? But sometimes they're not, right? Sometimes a tourist attraction is determined by local residents, right? So that are not trained in terms of like what exactly is a tourist attraction. They just deem it to be. And so be very careful when local residents tell you that this is a cool place to go visit, because it may not be. And so they might actually be sending to a tourist trap, tourist trap really just means a waste of time. Because one of the things that at least most tourists, American tourists at least, because again, Americans have a very limited amount of time when they're traveling, is that we don't have time to waste, right? For the most part. And so a tourist trap essentially means it's a waste of time. And if you go there, you're wasting your time. So for example, when I was driving through South Dakota, I don't know if anybody's been to South Dakota. Mount Rushmore, beautiful. Actually, South Dakota, beautiful. But I swear, I seen this billboard like everywhere on the road as I was driving through South Dakota. And I'm like going, what the heck is this wall drug? And so, I was like, I'm very curious now to figure out what this is. And so, but really what it is, it really is a waste of time. Unless you're going to the restroom, or unless you're going to grab some water or get some gas, it really is nothing. It's just this little store with a bunch of mementos or souvenirs. But if you're into mementos and souvenirs, then by all means stop. Otherwise, you don't need to stop there. It's nothing. Don't waste your time, in other words. All right, so how to increase the number of tourists? So you need to develop a tourism infrastructure, meaning that you need to have, well-built airports, right? You need to have a certain number of hotels or highways to get into that particular region, perhaps ports, for instance, as well. And so really the best region in the world to travel to or travel in is really Europe. Europe is the best, is the most well-developed and it has the best tourism infrastructure because, I mean, the countries are relatively small, but you can really hop in the train, right? In Europe, you can hop in the train in Portugal or in Spain, and you can travel all across, Europe on a train. It's very accessible. It's very easy. It's not very expensive. It's super easy to get around. You know, unlike, let's say, Los Angeles, LA is, gigantic, and the traffic here in Los Angeles is horrible. And so even though we have this beautiful weather in California, our tourism infrastructure in terms of, transit is pretty terrible. Our freeways are have not kept up with the growth of population. And so the idea of people coming to Los Angeles and spending time in LA, the idea of spending time in traffic is not really, preferred. And so again, Europe is the best region to travel in. And so um, you need advertising, you need social media or direct campaigns to try to increase the number of tourists by making, again, people aware, providing knowledge of that you even exist in the world. And so an example of this, let's see if I have a video. So which one do I want to show you? Costa Rica. Let's do Costa Rica. So one of the big things that really Costa Rica promotes, right, or they really get behind of is this idea of ecotourism. Really, the idea of ecotourism was again spearheaded by Costa Rica, and Costa Rica, could have very well headed in a different path, but they opted to change their policies. Not just the community, but also the government decided to do an about face and really focus on preserving nature and really trying to make Costa Rica a hub for people who are into nature. And so if you're into nature, you should definitely go to Costa Rica. The one thing I'll say about Costa Rica, it's interesting to drive at night in Costa Rica, especially if you get hit by fog. They actually say that you shouldn't drive outside of the city at night because the streets have actually no reflectors. You really can't see the road very well, especially in the fog. And so they actually advise you not to drive outside of the city at night. But it is a super cool place if you're just into nature. Another way of increasing tourists is using travel agents or tour operators. Now, the cruise line industry really does this a lot. And so the cruise line industry essentially gives incentives to travel agents So travel agents essentially recommend that people travel or go on a cruise. And so in order to do that, they usually bring travel agents or tour operators and give them like a free cruise or a highly discounted cruise. And then, they wine them and dine them and those sorts of things. And then, the travel agents go back to their regular job. And what the cruise line industry is essentially hoping for is that the travel agents or tour operators are actually going to, recommend a cruise as a potential thing to do on a vacation. PR. So PR is something that is very important for a particular location. So, for instance, to handle unfavorable stories, and also to try to take advantage of free media coverage. So, for instance, one thing that's happened, let's say in Mexico, for instance, is has gotten a terrible reputation of being dangerous because of the narcos, right? And so I don't think Mexico's actually done a very good job of handling those unfavorable stories. And so one of the reputations that you have because of this poor publicity is that it's a dangerous place to go and visit, and you shouldn't go visit. And so PR, this is where PR is important, is to essentially highlight the fact that it's not so dangerous. It's just isolated incidents. And so how do you handle these unfavorable stories like the fact that it's violent? How does LA handle the fact that there's lots of traffic? That's not it's a true unfavorable story, but how do we deal with that as people who live in Southern California? One way, right, of promoting Southern California is that we totally ignore the traffic part as we highlight the fact that our weather is great, right? If you want a sunny day, come to LA, right, sort of thing. And we also take advantage of free media coverage like sporting events, film and television, or the way that a city or a country is portrayed in a magazine. So, for instance, when I went to go, where was I at? I was in Chile, I think it was Chile, and I was up in the Andes Mountains. I wanted to get away for just a few days and work on my book. I was writing a book at the time. And somehow, some way, it came out that I was teaching in Orange County, and they didn't know anything about Fullerton or anything like that, but they knew what the OC was, right? The OC was that television program, and so people were always asking me questions in this isolated village, mind you, in the top of the mountains in Chile, but they knew about the OC, Orange County, because of a television program. And some would say this was one of the reasons why a lot of people like to come to Los Angeles, because they see the beautiful landscape that we have here. Because a lot of movies and television programs are shot in Southern California. And service culture, and this is somebody brought up about the idea of customer service. And so this is where, again, customer service is really important. And for some tourists, it's make or break, and it's going to generate a word of mouth. And so this is where it's really important. I know some of you work in the service industry, for instance, whether as a bartender or a waitress or a waiter or whatever. I know you work in the service industry as part of your job as you're trying to work your way through school, which is it's commendable. And so, anyways, it's really important that you treat people really well because you're part of this service culture. And so if people have a good experience with you, because again, it goes back to the idea of experiential marketing. If people have a good experience, they're going to tell their friends, and it's going to generate a buzz about your particular restaurant or region or whatever. And so if you have a good service culture, this is the reason why people come here. So for instance, again, somebody mentioned customer service. Americans, at least to my knowledge, and every place that I've been to, at least so far, not that I've traveled the most in the world, but I've traveled a fair bit. The U.S. is the best, and when it comes to that service. And so, but if you're looking for good service in other places, it's not a grain culturally like it is here. Here, it actually is something that It really is ingrained in your head when you first start working in your first jobs. I don't know if that's the case in other places in the world. So anyways, sales and promotions. So you can create, a discount, for instance, on your hotels in a particular location. You can create, let's say, discounts in terms of like flights, so people can get a cheap flight to your location, those sorts of things. You could also focus on the preservation, as I already mentioned, about the idea of Costa Rica. But UNESCO actually creates a list. UNESCO is this global organization, and it actually creates a list for world tourism, and it tells you like what are the best locations to go travel to in the world. And so, at least last time I looked, I haven't looked this past year because obviously of COVID kind of threw everything off. But at the time, at least last time I looked, when it came to preservation, Costa Rica was the best. Obviously, they've been the leader when it comes to ecotourism, but other places in the world have also sort of been making an effort to start creating sort of an ecotourism economy in their particular country. Some countries out like in Africa, like in South Africa, places like that, have started making steps to sort of this idea of preserving, for instance, their wildlife. Nepal, at least last time I looked, was the worst. And primarily because people are trying to hike up the Himalayas and hike up the Mount Everest, and they're leaving behind lots of trash. People do not pick up their trash. And also because the global warming is sort of exposing all sorts of things. So when people are hiking their way up the mountains, because of climate change or whatever you want to call it, is that the snow is melting. It's now actually exposing people. People's dead bodies are being exposed up in the mountain. It's kind of creepy, but anyways, there's a lot of garbage on the Himalayas. This is why it's considered to be the worst. Let's see, what else? So here's our
people think Californians are just a bunch of dreamers.
With our heads in the clouds.
Woo! Like a bunch of space cadets. Huh? What?
Is that the explosion?
Reset! Maybe we do live in a fantasy.
And we can get a little starry-eyed.
A little bit out there.
Off in La La Land?
Maybe.
But just a bunch of dreamers! No way.
We're just like everyone else.
We put our board shorts on, one leg at a time.
Drawn a blank. What's my line?
I find it funny that we don't, it's a good ad because it doesn't show us sitting in traffic. So that's pretty cool. Anyways, travel factors or factors of reasons why growth has happened. Air travel. So yes, of course, there are plane crashes. Of course, that does happen. But the fastest, the safest way to travel, and also better because the planes are better, is air travel. The one thing I'll say about air travel that's changed, which I think is kind of bad, but for the most part, it is insanely safe, is that it seems that the seats have gotten smaller. I'm not very tall. I'm like maybe 5'10", maybe, I think. Anyway, so, but I always feel like I'm scrunched in. I'm not even that big, so I just imagine how people who are much larger than me do it. But anyways, it does seem like the seats have gotten smaller in terms of like the front of your seats seem to be much more narrow than they used to be in the past. I could be wrong, but it seems that way. But anyways, there are more airports being built all over the place. And what is the world's busiest airport? It is the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. That is considered to be the busiest airport in the world. It's not JFK in New York or LAX here in Los Angeles or Heathrow over in London. And again, it's Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is the world's busiest airport. I believe it's because it's Delta's hub, I want to say. I think it's Delta's hub. So the interstate highways. Yes, Atlanta. And so the Interstate Highway Act of 1956 was then under President Eisenhower. So President Eisenhower is famous for a few things. He was a war hero. He was the guy who talked about or warned us about the military industrial complex. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that. This idea that we're allowing the military to essentially have too much political power. And he warned us about that. But anyways, the other thing he's sort of famous for that we overlook is that he helped to create the interstate highways through what's called the Interstate Highway Act. And this idea of building, freeways or modern freeways from coast to coast was started with good old President Eisenhower. And so how that helped tourism was essentially places that were, either local or regional tourist destinations that were not so easy to get to became much more accessible with the highways. When the highways were built, or freeways, as we call them here, when the freeways were built throughout the country, made tourist locations much more accessible. Hotels. There's more and more hotels. There's also different price points depending on whether or not you want to spend money on a 4-star hotel, right? Or if you want to spend money on a 1-star hotel, there's different pricing points depending on how much you can afford. But there's also way more hotels throughout the country. It used to be, the hotels were rather rare and they were few and far between. Now, most cities have either a hotel or a motel where you can spend the night after you've been traveling. So that makes it much more easy to travel. This idea of sleeping in a hotel or a motel and not sleeping in your car. Sleeping in your car sucks. Anyways, the Marriott International is the largest in terms of revenue. Not necessarily, I don't think it's the largest in terms of properties, but it's the largest in terms of amount of revenue generated. So Marriott International. Ports. There's more and bigger ports. So I know here in Long Beach, for instance, where I live, one thing that they've been discussing, or I think they already did it, is trying to make the port of Long Beach a little better and a little bigger. And so I guess because they want to start bringing in bigger cruise ships have already come here, but I think they want to make it even bigger, whatever, I'm not sure. But another place that actually is building a bigger port or has been or already built it was Miami. So a lot of cruise ships or cruises start in Miami. And so if you want to take a cruise, let's say to Europe or something like that, then you need to fly over to Miami. And so because of the new port in Southern Florida, it's really helped the local economy of South Florida. And so these ports are able to accommodate bigger ships, because one thing that's happening within the cruise line industry is that ships get bigger and bigger and bigger. They have more amenities. In other words, they become ships that have things for everyone, whether it's, going on water slides or gambling in a casino or watching a movie in a theater, those sorts of things. Computers. So public access to what computer program led to online travel agencies. That is Sabre, S-A-B-R-E. So Sabre was a computer program that was only used by the airlines initially. And eventually, as most of us got access to computers, including online travel agencies, they were able to access Sabre, S-A-B-R-E, and they could then make essentially book your airline travel for you. You don't have to call the airlines, and you can also do it by yourself, by the way. Which company created the dynamic package? That would be Expedia. So Expedia, the idea of, well, does anybody know what a dynamic package is? Yes, correct, Bailey. Very good. Yes, it's actually including everything, the hotel, the flight, the rental car, all together is a dynamic package. Although I have to say, you younger folks, right, or the idea of having a rental car, I think, is becoming passe. I think most of us, including me, who's older, would rather Uber everywhere rather than having a rental car. I think a rental car nowadays, I think, is considered more of a hassle than anything else. So I think this is a reason why also garages are being converted into homes, because the idea of having even cars, I think, is going to be passe. I think within your lifetime, maybe mine too, but certainly within yours. So again, it's dynamic package is the inclusion of a hotel, the flight, and a rental car. Who was the first airlines to establish a website? That would be Southwest Airlines. So Southwest Airlines is considered to be the first airlines to establish a website. All right, what was the first exhibit hall? The first exhibit hall was Bingley Hall in Birmingham. So I believe Birmingham, I believe, is in England. So Bingley Hall. So Bingley Hall is considered to be the first exhibit hall in the world. And so the whole point of a conventions and visitor bureaus, or CVBs, is essentially to promote the community as a tourist destination, promotes local tourist spots. So for instance, if you've ever been down to the CVB in Las Vegas, it promotes all the tourist attractions or tourist destinations in Las Vegas. If you've ever been to the CVB down in San Diego or Orange County, it essentially promotes all of the tourist destinations in the OC, and I think also LA. San Diego does the same thing. And it really helps the local tourist destinations bring in tourists from all over the country, all over the world. And it also helps promote the community as a convention and conference destination. So San Diego, for instance, is a super hot destination for conventions and conferences. So is Orange County, LA, more so now. When I used to work in special events, it was not, because the convention center was kind of isolated, but that is no longer the case. They did a good job of fixing up LA, at least that area of downtown LA. And so basically what the CVBs do is they target meeting planners initially, or conference planners. And so the meeting planner essentially organizes, what city it's going to take place in, and books the major hotels. And then the people who are going to attend the convention will start booking their rooms in that particular city. And so again, the importance of that is it brings in business travelers. The business travelers, again, pay a hotel. or a motel or a bed tax. I don't know how many of you have traveled, but if you ever look at your bill when you go to a hotel, motel, or whatever, you'll see like a tax. They'll say like a bed tax, hotel tax, or something, some sort of tax. They'll be added on to your room, and part of this money goes back to the CVB, but part of it also goes to build other things in the city. So again, I think it's weird that they tax business travelers who have no say in what's going to happen in the city. So it's interesting. Anyways, it uses tourism, right, as to improve the community's economic well-being. Because again, it's using tourism dollars to hopefully fix or help fix the infrastructure of the city. And what is the primary revenue stream for a CVB? Is a bed tax. Again, sometimes it might be called a motel tax or a hotel tax, but it could also be called a bed tax. And that's the primary revenue stream for a conventions and visitor bureau. What is the largest CVB? It is it's McCormick Place in the United States. McCormick Place, does anybody know where McCormick Place is located at? Ooh, very good, Jaylene. That's exactly right. Very good. Yes, McCormick Place is located in Chicago. Very good. It's located on the Naval Pier, place where I was almost electrocuted and killed by a thunderstorm, but that's a whole different story. The world's largest CVB, that is Hanover, or I should say Hanover Fairgrounds. So Hanover Fairgrounds. Hanover Fairgrounds is the largest in the world, and Hanover is located in Germany. So Hanover, Germany, and that is the world's largest CVB. And the place the CVB that generates the most revenue would be the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Bureau. I think they call it the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. But the CVB located in Las Vegas is the one that generates the most revenue, at least pre-COVID. Certainly not this past year, because COVID, hurt the gambling industry and the conventions industry immensely. But pre-COVID, it was making about $400 million. All right, so national parks. So there was a big decline this past year in number of visitors that went to national parks. Some would say it's a good thing because there's less people to impact the environment and bother the wildlife. So anyways, 237 million U.S. visitors went to go to national parks this year, which is, again, a big decline from the previous year. I want to say in 2019, I think it was 320 million, I want to say. Anyways, what was the first U.S. national park? It was Yellowstone. Yellowstone was the first national park. And I want to say Teddy Roosevelt was the person who declared it to be a national park, I want to say. Somebody please double check. I'm not sure. But I do want to say it was Teddy Roosevelt. But the first national park was, again, Yellowstone. the most visited national park is the Great Smoky Mountains. Great Smoky Mountains, super cool place to go visit up in the Appalachians. The only problem with, well, that was a problem, it's less so nowadays, is acid rain was ruining the forests for a while. I think that problem's been somewhat fixed, I think. But again, it's Great Smoky Mountains is the most visited park in the United States by far. If you're wondering what's number 2, Yellowstone this past year was number 2. The world's largest park is in Northeast Greenland National Park. So Northeast Greenland National Park is the world's largest park. I believe Greenland belongs to the country of Iceland, I want to say. I believe, gosh. So nature-based tourism it's an important revenue stream for emerging economies, whether the economy happens to be in Central America or South America or Africa or the Caribbean. There's been an effort within these developing countries is to essentially generate an economy around the idea of protecting their wildlife or protecting their flora. Flora is another way of saying plants, whether it's trees or flowers or whatever. And so there's been a huge effort in trying to preserve the wildlife, because the hope is that people are going to travel to that particular country to see the wildlife, whether it's in a safari or something like that. What country is trying to protect the takahe? So this is the takahe. If you're wondering what the takahe is, I won't show you the Yellowstone part, although it is super cool. This is the takahe. And so when I was in the country of New Zealand, I don't know if anybody's ever been to New Zealand, pretty cool place. This is outside of, Wellington. Yeah, Wellington, New Zealand. So anyways, this is the takahe. The takahe, they're down to, I want to say at one point in time, there was less than 100 takahes. I think they've gotten it up to less than about 500 now. But anyways, if you're not familiar with New Zealand is obviously an island. And so the birds, as you can see this bird, takahe, the birds in New Zealand do not fly. It's because there is no predators, at least predators that walk, in New Zealand. And so when the Europeans came to New Zealand, they had dogs and they had cats and they brought rats and those sorts of things. And essentially the dogs and the cats and the rats and just basically destroyed all the birds. They destroyed, and the people, of course, hunted a bunch of birds and decimated the indigenous wildlife of New Zealand. And so now New Zealand is sort of created this campaign to try to preserve its indigenous birds, including the takahe here. And so when I went to go to this place in New Zealand, there was this preserve on how to preserve the takahe. You really can't see it with the picture. I should have taken a better picture than this. But essentially, this is a 6-foot fence. And what the New Zealand government did was that they built the fence down like 4 feet. So in other words, a rodent like a rat or a cat or a dog couldn't dig under the fence. And I don't know if you can see on the top of the fence, they have it sort of so that the animal slips. So in other words, if a dog tried to jump the fence, they couldn't do it. It's going to slip and fall. Also, if a cat tried to jump the fence, it's going to slip and fall. They've constructed some sort of fence that's supposed to keep all wildlife or domestic dogs or cats from getting into the preserve so in order to protect takahe. So New Zealand is trying really hard to protect its indigenous birds because they're critically endangered. Oh, Wellington is beautiful. You got to go. It's pretty incredible. I keep trying to convince my wife to move to New Zealand, but I don't think she's gonna. I don't think she's gonna go for it. It's too bad. It's really pretty gorgeous out there. Anyways. Okay, so I know one of the case studies that we're going to talk about at the end talks about hunting. Hunting is most certainly very controversial. It has certainly a negative connotation, no question about it. And so it is, depending on how you look at it, it's either a vital revenue for developing economies, or it's just, you're simply killing animals for pleasure. So I don't know. I have no dog in the fight. I know my brother hunts, but he only hunts deer. So, deers are not endangered, and deers are actually pretty dangerous. Actually, if you look this up, and this is the truth, deers kill a lot of people from car accidents. They run into cars and they kill the people. Anyways, so killing an animal, what is hunting? It's killing an animal for recreation, for the purpose of displaying its antlers, its horns, its teeth, its tusks, etc. If you're anti-hunting, you certainly don't want to visit my brother's in-laws. They have trophies everywhere. And so the U.S. is the largest importer of trophies. In other words, we have a lot of people who are into hunting in the United States who go off to Africa or other places throughout the world, pay lots of money to go kill an animal, and they bring back the trophy. And so, again, trophy hunting is controversial. One of the arguments against trophy hunting is essentially you're killing the biggest and strongest males. And so essentially you're cutting off the gene pool, right? When you kill the biggest and strongest, then the less dominant male is the one that's breeding. And so it hurts. Some argue it hurts the species. Sounds logical to me. So anyways, it centers on the big five. And the big five, if you're wondering what the big five are, it's the lion is one of the big fives, at least in Africa. The leopard is the other big five. The buffalo, the water buffalo, is another one of the big five. And the elephant is another of the big five. And the white rhino. The white rhino is critically endangered. So lions, leopards, buffalo, elephants, and the white rhino are the big five. And when people talk about trophy hunting and to talk about the big five, they're talking about those big five. And so people will pay lots of money, again, to go hunt trophies, right, that center on these five big animals. And so African trophy hunting is an important revenue stream in countries like South Africa and in places like Tanzania. There's actually an economy around trophy hunting. So I've never been trophy hunting, and I've never been to a safari, and I've never been to Africa. But from all accounts, from what I've been told, is essentially is that these hunters hire local people from the villages, and they pay them money. So essentially as guides to help them track and hunt these creatures, these animals. And so one last thing, I think, is getting close to the end. Even here in the United States, there is a lot of money generated from hunting in the United States. So I don't know how many of you hunt. Maybe one of you or two of you, I don't know. But you have to get a license in order to hunt, right? So, for instance, my brother who does hunt, when he has to go, let's say he goes to Colorado to go hunt for deer, or he goes to Arizona to hunt for wild boar. And so he has to get a license to go hunting. And from what all accounts, based on what he's told me, they're pretty expensive because each state only gives a certain number of tags, depending on the number of animals that they estimate having in the wild. So only a certain number of deer are allowed to be hunted, only a certain number of elk, whatever, bear, whatever. And so one last thing before I conclude, and this is the end of the class, is if you're just wondering what invasive creature is destroying the national habitat, I know I'm skipping ranch hunting. Which invasive creature is destroying the national habitat in Florida and in California? The boas. There's boas in Florida that are not indigenous to Florida, that are just absolutely destroying the wildlife of the Everglades. And the wild pig is destroying wildlife in California.